Hey friends, so I've made another sound design discovery that I'm super excited about, and I want to share it with you right now for free. You can grab this Ableton set using the link down in the description. But essentially, thanks to Ableton's scale-aware system, we can now tune reverbs to be harmonically related to the notes that we're playing. Now, the opportunities here are endless, but here are some examples of the kinds of sounds that you can expect to create with this setup. So I got this idea because I heard about Eventide's new Temperance plugin, which is essentially a highly flexible modal resonator fed into a reverb. I downloaded the demo and found that the resonator can be controlled by choosing which notes you want to use or by incoming MIDI. It's a great plugin like all Eventide plugins, and if you like the UI and the sound, you should definitely grab it. But again, just like 99% of all plugins out there, we can create the same kind of thing in Ableton using native live devices. And in this case, we can take this idea of tuning reverbs even further because Ableton's scale awareness system is so flexible and deeply integrated. Let's check it out. Okay, so when you download this set, it'll be cleaned up for you, so it's really simple to use. But essentially the idea is this. We have a dry-wet chain where there's, of course, a completely dry signal, and in this case, I'm just using an instance of drift right here. Sounds like that. But we have a wet chain, which is a spectral resonator fed into a reverb. So you can use this dry-wet knob right here to blend between the incoming signal and the tuned reverbs. So before we get into all this craziness, I just want to show you how to use this in a really basic and simple way. Essentially, you have your dry-wet knob, and so of course you can blend between the dry and wet signals, and then you can just simply choose these different presets, and you'll notice that the dry-wet, even as I switch through all these different presets here, the dry-wet remains wherever you want it. So if you want to blend some of your original instrument in or not, you can simply choose it and leave it and set it and forget it. But for now, I'm going to leave it turned all the way up, and we can just listen to some of these presets. That's so cool. So you might be curious how this sounds in comparison to just a standard reverb setup. Well, what's awesome about this is that you have this resonator amount control in each one of these racks, and when it's at 100%, the resonators are completely fed before the reverb hears the signal, but you can pull this back and dial in a unique blend. Let's start without any at all, and you can hear just the standard reverb. And I'll start to blend in some of the resonator. We can hear how that reverb gets focused down to just relevant notes that we're playing. So awesome. But this setup is so interesting for another reason, and it's because you can simply choose a scale, okay, from the top here, or if you're using a clip, you can choose the scale within the clip. But in this case, because there are no clips in this set, you can just simply choose the scale up here. Check this out. So I can go from choosing something diatonic like C minor or C major, but what's really interesting about this specific setup is you can choose things like harmonic minor, for example, and now we get this haunting kind of thing where the harmonies that are being generated by whatever resonator that we're using is scale aware, okay? It's coming up with harmonic minor notes. And it's so amazing what you can do here. So let's break down what's actually happening. So again, you've seen the dry-wet kind of situation here. But within the Spectral resonator, we've got this button called Quantize. And what's so interesting and useful about Quantize is that when you turn this button on, it'll take the partials that are being generated by this Spectral resonator, and it will lock them to the scale that you're using. And in this case, we're using C harmonic minor. But let's go ahead and just choose, I don't know, C minor for right now. And the other aspect of this is that we're feeding MIDI in from the instrument that we're using. And again, all of the sounds that you're hearing greatly depend on the input, okay? So in this case, Let's go back to the dry signal just to quickly point out. This drift is just sort of making a filtered saw waveform, kind of going up and down in terms of its harmonic content. And that movement will generate different partials and different harmonics as it moves up and down, providing some movement to the sound. Now, I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds here, but again, the advantage of this quantize button that was added to Spectral Resonator is that now not only can we shift up and down our scale degrees, right? If this is turned off, you see that this says semitones. If it's turned on, you see that it says scale degrees. Not only can we pitch shift up and down our scale using this, but we can also use this stretch control here. And what this does is it basically takes evenly distributed partials and then distributes them farther apart from each other. So let's go back over here, and what I'm going to do is within all of these instrument racks, you can actually turn the reverb all the way down. And so we can see these controls right here. We have our scale degrees, right? So let's just leave it on 0 for now, so it's the same pitch as my incoming note. What I can do is I can take stretch though, and what stretch will do is it will distribute those partials, but each partial will be a note within our scale. So listen to the amount of different harmonically related tones that I'm generating just by moving stretch around. That's the first little nugget. And the next little nugget I want to show you is that the Spectral Resonator has these 4 different modes. We have none, chorus, wander, and granular. Essentially none, what this will do is it will make it so that the partials that are being generated are not being modulated at all, as in like their pitch will be constant. And you get sort of organ tones, which I find to be kind of fun, but for the most part, I like it when they move around, and that's why these options exist here. But there's another option called granular, and when I started doing this whole like tuned reverb setup, I realized that granular has so many opportunities that I created a different track just for the granular mode because there's so many different sounds that you can create. So we've already checked out sort of the chorus or the wander modes kind of sound, but with the granular sound, I've made a whole nother set of presets because they're so interesting in and of themselves. So first of all, this one called Spectral Glitter, what we're doing is we're basically taking advantage of when you have low mod rates on granular, it will sort of generate these little micro melodies depending upon what you're playing. Isn't that incredible? Here, let's take a listen without the reverb. And of course, it's in wide, beautiful stereo, right? How amazing is that? So when you add the reverb, though, I mean, the sound design potential here is insane. Let's try a different one. That's so cool. And then I realized that if I turn the reverb time down, I can isolate some of the sounds that these resonators are making, but still sort of put you in a place. Like I called this one Icebox. And another thing I should point out is that you'll notice that different types of resonating create different gain levels. So that's why in this case we have input gain that you can change here. And maybe one more thing to point out on this Infinite Glass preset is that you also have a unison mode inside of Spectral Resonator that, you know, takes copies of whatever you generate and makes more and more of them. And so with a high mod rate and a lot of unison, you can get these insanely long, beautiful, pitch modulated super reverbs. So yeah, using Spectral Resonator before a reverb is a super powerful thing to do, and there are so many interesting opportunities here. So I want to point out before I move on, though, you'll notice that that same drift is living inside of this instrument rack. And so if you want to use whatever you're messing with or whatever the instrument is in your track, all you got to do is delete this. and then you'll see that it says drop instrument here, and then you put your instrument, whatever you want to use, in this signal chain, and there you go, you're off to the races. So, and remember, you're not limited to Ableton devices if you don't want to be. For example, here's a Pigments instance. I'm just dropping Pigments into this instrument chain, and I can use my Spectral reverb on whatever sounds I want to use inside of Pigments. So let's choose Digital Toad. All right, cool. So now when we add our Spectral reverb back in, so something I should point out that I think is so interesting about this is that when you back the dry wet off a little bit on these reverbs, you're basically providing yourself accompaniment, like harmony, because all these tuned reverbs are essentially playing the same scale that you are. That's so cool. So the next example I want to show you is a completely different approach. And while we still have our dry wet setup, in this situation we're using Ableton's resonators. And this is even more exciting to me because I've always gravitated toward resonators, but Ableton added a scale aware button on resonators, and this just of course opens up some insanely awesome opportunities for this tuned reverb idea. So what's happening here is that when you turn on Scale Aware, you can shift, of course, the resonating notes that are coming out of resonators to live within the scale that you're using. And so in this case, what I've got going on here is the first resonator is decoupled in pitch from all of the other resonators. And not only is it decoupled in pitch, but it's also decoupled in volume. You can see that the gains are going up and down based on this LFO right here. So let's go ahead and instead of using another drift instance, let's go ahead and use an arpeggiator. Again, the sounds that you feed into this setup greatly determine the things that come out of it. So let's go ahead and just have a sequence going. Okay, so checking out movement. Awesome. So you can hear there are so many incredible opportunities here. Let's go ahead and break this down a little bit. So yeah, this LFO here has, of course, a rate control. And let's go ahead and bring the reverb out for a second. And you don't have to use the LFO at all, or you can use it. But what's interesting about this is that you can move this note distribution around, and essentially in the middle, all of the resonators are the same pitch. Kind of your classic like Car Plus Strong kind of setup where you have a tune delay, right? But as you go up or down, you'll notice that the pitches will get farther and farther away from each other. So modulating this inside of a clip would really yield some interesting, awesome musical results. But what's cool about resonators is that there's actually two modes. Right now we're using the A mode. If I pull this way, you can get sort of two different flavors of it. Right? And then of course, spinning up this LFO, we can get some really interesting modulation going on. Right? And that's awesome by itself, but then when you add the reverb, of course, it's just... So awesome. Okay, and then the last track here, this is using Resonator in a different way. We're kind of staying on mode A, but what's interesting about this one is that you can tune the individual pitches here with this, and then I've created a bunch of presets with that approach. And this is a great mode to use for pads. In fact, I've even made a preset called Pad Enhancer. Let's go ahead and listen to our input sound. So it's just a standard wavetable here. Let's go ahead and turn this into somewhat of a pad. So I'm going to open my release time. Maybe I will go to my filter frequency and use the envelope, and maybe I'll go into my amp and then I'll open up the attack so we get sort of a pad sound. Now bringing this rack back in, that kind of has like a classic like shimmer reverb kind of sound. But of course I can tune each one of the resonators. And also I should point out that the filter in the resonators really determines what ends up getting resonated. So as I pull the filter type down, we are now in high pass mode. Okay, so if I pull my frequency down, right, that's our pad now versus what it sounded like before, which is just... And again, it's all tunable based on the scale that you have coming in. So Phrygian, for example. Or melodic minor. So yeah, yet again, just like with Drift Swarm, I couldn't keep this idea to myself. Like, please make amazing music with this. There's so many cool things that you can do with this kind of setup. And yeah, I haven't even explored some of the other scale awareness options in Ableton. I imagine using Auto Shift could be pretty interesting, or Corpus with the incoming MIDI that you can change it, Shifter. There's just a lot of different opportunities here to tune reverbs, to put a resonator of some kind before the reverb, maybe even using a vocoder. I don't know. Yeah, so take this idea and please run with it. If you like this kind of thing, please like, comment, subscribe. Much love, everybody. Thanks for watching. I'll see you next time.